Good morning and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP, a bi-weekly conversation with AARP staff and volunteers to talk to Connecticut decision makers about policies and programs that are of interest to older adults. My name is Doroghazi and I'm one of the policy directors at AARP Connecticut. I'm very pleased to share this week's co-hosting duties with Marilyn Diaz, an AARP Connecticut volunteer from Windsor. Hey, Marilyn.
Hey, Anna, thank you so very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you and with my representative, Jane Garibay. Yay!
Yay! Marilyn is an incredibly active AARP Connecticut volunteer who serves on our executive council, participates in our Fraud Watch network, fights for policy changes as an advocacy volunteer, and much, much more. We really appreciate you, Marilyn, and all of the wonderful AARP Connecticut volunteers who advance our work at the Capitol and out in the community. As you mentioned, Marilyn, you also happen to be a constituent of today's special guest, Representative Jane Garibay. Representative Garibay has represented Connecticut's 60th district, which includes Windsor and Windsor Locks, since 2019. She is a member of the Legislature's Commerce Committee, vice chair of the Human Services Committee, and co-chair of the Aging Committee. Representative Garibay, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always good to see you, Anna. And Marilyn, again, always good to see you, and I'm happy to be here today.
Yay! So I'm going to get this party started, if you don't mind. So Representative Garibay, to get us started, could you please tell us a little bit about what led you to run for office and what you enjoy most about being a state representative? And I know you enjoy and love your job.
I do. I've always been involved in the community since I was a child, and we lived some years in Vermont. I lived 9 years in Mexico City, Mexico, and then back here in the States. And I've always been involved in the communities that I've lived. With things that were going on 4 years ago, I thought that I could have a bigger scope of influence and to do more to help the people of my community by running for office. I also didn't like the partisan nature of things, becoming more partisan. And I believe on more issues, especially like aging, that we can work together to help our elderly. And we need the support of the whole, for me, it's the House of Representatives, right? To bring them all on board to support our seniors. So that's basically, and I love, it is two-pronged. You have to be able to pass the legislation to put into law, but you can only do that by being involved in your community and knowing and listening to what is happening in people's lives and how you can help them. And I love constituent services, so.
Yeah, and you've always been wonderful about meeting with AARP Connecticut and our constituent volunteers who live in your district. So we always really appreciate that, and how accessible you've been.
I remember how impressed I was my first year, and I looked out at a hearing and everyone was with their red shirts, and the advocacy that you do for seniors, you guys are the best, really. And I mean that truly. You really advocate for our seniors.
Right, and you do as well as co-chair of the Legislature's Aging Committee. So in that role, you play a really important part in advancing bills that AARP Connecticut cares about. For folks who are not very familiar with how the legislature works or how legislative committees work, could you speak a little bit about what the Aging Committee does and what it means that you are the co-chair of that committee?
So I am really excited to be chosen co-chair of the Aging Committee. I feel like I found my home. I love my commerce. I love human services. A lot of the committees, but this is truly a home. First, it starts with just ideas. We look at what was proposed last year and did not pass. Why didn't it pass? Is it valuable? Once we take a look at that, we kind of go over which bills have come in. Any person, even if they're not in my district, can propose a bill. They can put it forth. That's why we have over 5,000 bills that come through, which gets whittled down to 200 to 300 that will pass in a session. Once it comes to us, the most important thing is to have a public hearing on it. And that is all documented. So when, for example, AARP is out fighting for a bill for seniors, that is documented. So when we're looking at the bills, my co-chair and myself and our committee, we look at, was there support for the bill? Or was, AARP against it, was Leading Age, all the different entities. If they're for it, that gives us more strength in going forward with a bill, because we here, as you know, we meet with you, we meet with different groups to see what your priorities are, because you're out on the ground, we all live in our little area. And I can see what some of my seniors, by reaching out, like you said, we've done programs together. So that's really important to hear people. Before I only had my constituents emailing me, but now as the co-chair of the aging committee, I represent the whole seniors in the whole state, to come forward. But the most important is hearing from the public and from groups like yourself. And it goes through, and then, from that we see, and we got to work bipartisan. We had the aircraft carrier bill that had 4 bills in it. One had an issue that did not come out of committee unanimously. We were able to take that off and still get a good bill through. So it's everyone working together. And my co-chair is so important, because if I have them in the House first, I pass them on to her at the Senate. She's got to get them passed in her group, right? So it's very important. And I love my co-chair, Senator Pat Billy Miller. She is awesome. We work really well together, which is important. So that's kind of the process, but the hearings are important and testimony is important.
Congratulations on becoming the co-chair, because I am so proud of the fact that you got that position, because I can tell you that as a constituent, as an AARP volunteer, you have always stopped and listened and heard me, whether it was as a constituent or as an AARP volunteer. And I so appreciate that. And what amazes me is that, you said it, the Connecticut General Assembly considers thousands of bills every year, over 5,000 you just said. And many of them will impact older adults in one way or another. Could you speak about a few of the bills that passed during this 2022 legislative session that you think will have a positive impact on older adults throughout the state?
I think there's a lot. So for example, healthcare workers that work for agencies that are coming into our state, and no one knows who they are, what those agencies are, they're not registered. And with the bill, they are now going to have to register in the state, so we know who they are. We did some on requiring nursing homes and residential care homes to electronically report involuntary discharges. People were being discharged onto the street practically if they didn't have a place to go. And there are many in those situations that don't have family left or own their own home or a place to go. So to me, that was one of the best things we did. We also hired a long-term ombudsman to have a working group to study specific issues with managed approved programs. These studies seems like a lot of things go to study, but we don't know where we're going unless we know. Making a law is a very important thing. And so we have to make sure that we know, all the consequences, and what's going. We also developed an advisory for the Medicaid long-term care and home care applicants. I know from a task force out came to put language for that you might need help. If you have a complicated situation, you might want to talk to a lawyer. But we also felt that if yours is just, I'll call it a regular situation without a lot of complications, your social services, AARP, there's a lot of people that you can go to for help without spending $250 to $500 an hour for a lawyer, right? So that was protecting seniors again. We're going to do a study of homemaker companion agencies. So that, there's issues out there that we're hearing, whether it's in a nursing home, whether it's at home, whether it's at our adult daycare centers. And then also there was a bill last minute that was bipartisan that will look at the community spouse of an institutionalized Medicaid recipient, so it's of a certain income, so they can keep a little more, because what we do is we drive them into poverty and they lose their homes. And that's not, people should have the choice to age in place if they want to. I believe in choices, whether it's an adult daycare center, whether it's at home, whether you choose a nursing home, assisted living, seniors should have choices of how they want to live.
And that's one of our main missions. And so thank you for embodying that for us. I'm going to change gears a little bit. Anna mentioned that I'm a volunteer with AARP's Fraud Watch Network, which helps people of all ages get reliable, up-to-date information and alerts about fraud prevention, and provides resources to help you spot a crime, protect yourself and your loved ones. So is fraud an issue that has come up on the Aging Committee? And do you think it's an issue that we will see more legislation on in coming years in Connecticut?
Yeah, I hope so. I just know from talking to my constituents, I mean, two recently, one was an elderly woman who got the call, your daughter's been kidnapped, you have to pay. Luckily, she didn't drive and called her son for a ride. But I had another gentleman that actually went to the bank and they let him take out $80,000. And he wired it and they lost $80,000. So, you know, everybody hates legislation or they hate the rules, but I would love to work with banks so that there's some kind where a senior still has the freedom to spend their money the way they want to. But in some situation like that, I know if I'm a senior, I would give the bank permission to call my children if I were doing something that was different or erratic, right? So those are just two instances recently. And I think we have to be aware of it, right? And especially when it comes to social media, on the computer, etc. Because I know as a senior myself, I'm not as savvy as my kids are, right? And so I'm always saying, is this real or is this not real? And I think the more we can get out and educate our seniors into these different scenarios, it'll be better for our whole community. So I hope so. I look forward to working with you, Marilyn, on, legislation.
Yeah, and something that you mentioned is important, this idea of constituents coming to you maybe because they need some guidance or some help accessing resources. And I know you and I have done some events out in the community talking about community resources for older adults. So I don't think people necessarily understand the extent to which elected officials can help with accessing services, with getting information, with trying to understand what's available in the community. How does that work with your office and for legislators in general? How can legislators and their staff help constituents when issues come up and they need a little bit of assistance?
During COVID, it was so much. And I have to say, not just for the elected officials, but for our staff in unemployment issues, all different things, but we have a direct line to these departments that, have done an incredible job with the staff they've had, et cetera, during COVID. But we can sometimes, many times, not just sometimes, many times, get answers for them or get someone to call them. Because again, not being as tech savvy as I would say I'm not a super tech savvy person like my children are. So that you could have someone call you and you could talk to them, you could tell them what your issue is. And I will say that in 95% of the cases, we are able to help. I had a woman who had cancer and she was looking for a passport to go overseas for some treatment and couldn't get through to Stanford. It was during COVID, everything was closed. So we reached out to Senator Blumenthal's office. Within a day, we had an answer. Within 5 days, they had her getting her passport down in Stanford and she could fly off to do, what she felt she needed to do. So it can go from something like that to something more serious, a fraud. How do you report that fraud? How do we keep track of it? And then the informational piece, we did a senior and we're doing one coming up in the Windsor Locks portion, which is for everyone, but it's being held in Windsor Locks. The more information we can get out to people, the better it is. And that was very well attended. When you get 50, 60 people at a meeting, that's like, you've done it. So it's always try. And most, like my cell phone is out there And if you only have my state one, my aide answers that or get right back to get me the information. So really feel free to reach out. And if you're advocating for something, I tell people, just speak from the heart, just 3 or 4 lines. You don't have to give me that copy and paste. Because if I hear from you from your heart, a real email, I'm human, I respond to it more. My heart reaches out. And I may only be a few sentences also. I don't copy and paste my answers in there. I answer my emails. But that is very, very important to reach out if you have a question, you have an idea. Many good ideas come from, groups like yours and from constituents because they've lived it.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I can attest to the fact that I get immediate responses from you, and I so appreciate that. And even though you've already talked about it throughout, I'm going to ask it because it bears repeating. Do legislators ever sponsor legislation based on those concerns or ideas that they're hearing from their constituents? And, what would you prefer that people do if you have an idea for legislation or have an action issue they really care about and want their elected officials to take action, not just listen to it, but actually do some of the legislative stuff? So what's the best way to do that?
Go to your legislator, but you can also go, if you don't live in Windsor or Windsor Locks, you can come to me with an aging idea. To give you a good example of how that worked this past session, a resident of Windsor came to me about our adult daycare centers and how some of them were closing. I then met with our town manager, with the director of our adult daycare center, the Caring Connection. And so in learning about it, I didn't know that they only get paid $74 a day, and that includes transportation, 2 meals, a nurse on staff, etc. I didn't know that 90% of the people that attend daycare centers live at home with family that work. So what's going to happen if they don't have a daycare center to go to? They're going to be going to nursing homes because people need to work. And that is not, and that the governor has really been pushing for aging in place, being with family, having that choice. So we had a few close. We're down to 36 adult daycare centers in the state. We were able to secure $3 million for those 36 daycare centers this year to hold them. And I decided, instead of doing a legislative working group or task force, which can take time, a task force has sometimes 1 or 2 years to get it up and running, as I found out anyways. So I am doing an informal working group on adult daycare centers. And what I want to do is say, how do we do this? It's not if we are or any of this. All right, everyone in this room, we're here to find a solution. I want to come out with a definite solution to save our adult daycare centers. So that's how, because of one idea that came to me, and I knew about our adult daycare center. Years ago, my mom would go a couple mornings a week, and I knew all that, but I didn't know they were in danger. And there are many that are nonprofit, some are for-profit. So DSS now has that $3 million they can distribute. I don't know how they're going to choose to distribute it, but we have that money, and that's thankful. It's that Tony Walker, Rep. Tony Walker, and Senator Austin. They were great. Last minute, they were able to find that pocket of money to help them. So that's just one idea. Someone came to me, and it didn't have to do with aging, and it'll sound a little frivolous, but it was making the state animal the rescue animal. And I really pushed it past the House pretty strongly, but then it didn't get heard in the Senate. So, I got to do a better job for that. And with our kid governor this year, he's from Windsor. He's the first male kid governor. We have to, and his agenda is animal cruelty, bringing awareness to it and, help stopping that. So we just thought it would fill in. So, and that was just an idea. So ideas coming, that is great. Sometimes we can make them happen. If they have a fiscal note, as you know, it's a little bit harder. So we have to really prove our case, like with the adult daycare centers.
Which is why those studies are so good and putting ideas into action. Yay. You know what? So before we wrap up our conversation, I know we can be with you for hours, no doubt. but is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would like to discuss? Do you have any helpful resources to share or recommendations for how people can keep themselves informed as the legislative session gets underway? So anything you'd like to talk about?
Right. So I think it's important to, if you're on Facebook, sorry, there's my rescue dog barking in the background. So on Facebook, so for example, if you're interested in human services, you should be on Kathy Abercrombie's Facebook page because she'll be posting more things through there or through a newsletter. So with mine, that's important. And just reaching out, going when we have AARP at a meeting to talk about elder care or whatever the topic is, to be there, go to it, make an effort. You need a ride, call me, we'll find someone to bring you. Do you know what I mean? We can work that out with our senior center to do that. And just sharing, I get so many emails from caring people with caring ideas and different situations. And that is important. Bring it to us, bring it to your AARP, right? You are an incredible resource for them. I love the new Zoom for hearings, the virtual hearings, because you don't have to get there, sign up and wait 20 hours or, a long time. You can be home making dinner for the family, watching, and when it's your turn to testify, but you can also be listening. What are the ideas out there? When you're talking healthcare for undocumented children, and I hear from those children and those parents, you can understand the situation a lot more, right? So I guess that would be the hearings are a great way to catch up on it.
Yeah, and I love that throughout this conversation, you've been sharing all of the ways that you just everyday citizens and residents of Connecticut can show up and can influence this process, whether it's being heard at a public hearing or reaching out at a community event or calling or emailing. There's so many more ways to get involved than I think most folks realize. So I really appreciate that, that came up during our conversation. I hope people walk away from this thinking, you know what, I do have a good idea. I'd love to reach out. I'd love to get more involved.
I meet Saturday mornings for coffee, either in Windsor or Windsor Locks. And if I know, I'll meet with you for a half hour over coffee at one of the local places to be able to listen to those, because what I go through in my head, it's listen, learn, and then act. Listen, learn, act. And that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Representative Garibay, for making time to speak with us today. And thanks also to Marilyn Diaz, not only for co-hosting this conversation, but for all the wonderful work that you do every day as an AARP Connecticut volunteer. If you're interested in learning more about AARP's legislative work, the Fraud Watch Network, our upcoming events, or so many more topics, please visit aarp.org/CT. Or feel free to reach out to me directly at Doroghazi@aarp.org. Thank you so much for joining us today, Representative Garibay and Marilyn, and anybody who's watching. And we hope you'll tune in again in 2 weeks for another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP. Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Bye.